Good evening, everyone. As you file in the door, welcome to week one of Agile Evolved, the big picture. My name's Shane Murphy from IT Masters and Charles Sturt University. And what we will do, as always, is give everybody 3 to 4 minutes to file in and get themselves all set up. And while you're doing that, you might like to look at our poll tonight, the first of 3 polls that we'll be hosting during the evening. This one's called Your Organization and Agile, and we'll give you a couple of minutes to be able to do that. And in the meantime, if you've answered the poll, don't forget to say hello in the chat. Let us know where you're dialing in from this evening, this evening Australian time. Let us know what you're up to, what you're hoping to get out of the course if you work in the area. Say hello to Brenton, say hello to Lil, our mediator for the evening. And also to remember, if you want us to see what you're doing, if you want everybody to see, remember to set your thing to everyone, not just hosts and panelists on the chat app. And I will say, if you have questions, you can put them in the Q&A app. But as I said, I will give everybody about another couple of minutes to fill in the poll and get ready. The poll is up now. It's Your Organization and Agile. Just, here's the questions. How well does your organization use or approach Agile? The answers range from Agile what? Who? We have little idea how to do this well, but we do talk about it. It's slightly mysterious or random, but it sometimes works. It's not always consistent, but we do get some results. We have good, reliable approach that most people work well with, and we have a great Agile strategy, and it really helps us succeed. So it'll give us a little bit of an idea about how people are approaching it. And I can see people from all over Australia, the Czech Republic, Manila, Zambia, Canberra. It's fantastic to see that our short courses get people from everywhere. But I will just switch my sound off for just 1 or 2 more minutes and let you fill in the poll and have it say hello. I see that somebody's invited their AI assistant along. That'll be interesting to see. Some of you may have done our short course last year on an introduction to practical AI for non-coders. But yes, be interesting to see what the links are. By the way, at the end of this, you will also be able to download a copy of the chat. So if people say interesting things, you'll be able to get that and reflect upon it later on. So I'm just going to end the poll now. We've had 4 minutes and about 167 people have done the poll, and I will share the results in a couple of minutes. In fact, I'll let Brenton do it. And first, we'll go through some housekeeping. Welcome again. This is Agile Evolved, the big picture, a short course from IT Masters and Charles Sturt University. Our mentor today is Brenton Burchmore, who has presented, he tells me, now 9 short courses with us, which is, I think, something of a record. It goes for 4 weeks, same bat time, same bat channel, every Wednesday evening at 7:30. In terms of what we'll call housekeeping, just remember in your chat to set your chat to everyone. Q&A, please put in the Q&A section. They're the questions that you would like Brenton to ask about the conversation that we're having. If you've got what we call process questions, like when's the poll going to be available, when's the download going to be available, or other things that are more IT Masters in general questions. You can put them in the chat and Lily will be there to give you some advice. Lily tonight is our administrator and mediator, and we'll be keeping an eye on what goes on in the chat, as will Brenton and I whenever we can. But that's about all. I hope everybody's having a good evening, morning, and afternoon. Thank you. Yes, it is showing my age indeed. Although my 4-year-old grand-nephew loves Batman and sings this Batman song. So we do actually refer to that. We will pause for questions a couple of times during the section of the lecture as well. So there'll be bits and pieces that you can get involved in. Please chat to each other in the chat. We often find that lots of people have got really, really good stuff to share with everybody in the chat, and it's really interesting. But I'm now going to get out of your way. I've been Shane Murphy. I'll be helping Brenton this evening, and I'd like you to introduce you again to Brenton Burchmore, who is one of our most famous mentors. He's been working with us for many years now. He lives in Singapore, and he does lots and lots of subjects. If you've been around for a while, you will probably have come across Brenton already. We did note today that somebody has actually passed 37 of our 50+ short courses over the years. So that is an achievement and a record that I'm sure somebody can beat one day. Over to you, Brenton. Welcome aboard.
Thanks very much, Shane. Hello, everyone. Good evening, good morning, welcome. We are off for a bit of a wild start tonight. We've got a lot to cover. I'm going to give you a background of all the things that I'm planning to share with you, and looking forward to your questions along the way that we can hopefully tackle. First, I'm going to share with you this poll and the results from it. For those of you who are interested, you can see here that there's quite a few people who are really yet to figure out, or their organization is yet to figure out, how Agile is going to work for them. And the bulge seems to be that they get good results from Agile, but it's not always perhaps what they want it to be or what it could be. So outside of that, a fairly even spread. But we do have some people here, I'm delighted to see, that have a really great Agile strategy. And for that reason, if anything doesn't get covered for any of you tonight, we don't answer your questions or we don't get sorted, please use the forums in the IT Masters Learn, because there's going to be people in this cohort who may know the answers and are happy to share and talk about it. So do share your questions, do share your views and understanding in the forums later. Now, I'm going to give, let me close this down. Firstly, a quick overview or a reminder for those of you who might have already seen it, what we're going to be covering in this course overall. Course syllabus tonight, we're going to talk about Agile philosophy. We're actually going to deconstruct some of the key attributes and elements of what makes Agile a thing. Next week, we're going to go deep into projects and project delivery. So we're going to steer away from that a little bit. So if you're looking for things like how does Scrum work and those sorts of deals, we'll be covering that in detail next week. After that, we're going to talk about Agile in ongoing delivery. So how would Agile principles work when you're dealing with value streams and service delivery and things that are ongoing, like continuous integration, continuous delivery. So we're going to touch on those things in the third week. In the fourth, we're going to talk about hybrid, joining Agile with other methodologies, such as how does it work with waterfall? How do you scale it up? How do you blend it with other things? And how do you use it as a toolbox to do a variety of stuff? That's in our final week. So if you're looking forward to that, hang in there. We'll get there in week 4. Tonight, specifically, we're going to be talking about the intellectual side of Agile, the Agile mindset. So we're going to look at what are the fundamental things when we break them down into all of the components that we tend to think and how we think about things in business. We're going to talk about what it is that leads us towards Agile. We're also going to talk about some of the other fundamental attributes of Agile. So some of the traditional things that you might have heard of, you might have thought of, the traditional words that think, okay, yeah, that's a feature of Agile. And we'll talk about a little bit about why that exists and what its function within the Agile frameworks. We're then going to talk a bit about information and our relationship with information and how Agile and information and how all that is changing, because this is a bit of a lead-in for us to try and understand where Agile is going and why Agile is going to be, or already is, leading into all sorts of other areas in business. So hopefully we'll find a few sneak peeks that will then let us talk a bit about some unusual use cases some stuff where you might not think that Agile is necessarily helping us, but where it might. So there might be a few surprises in all that. But first, a quick background on me for those who aren't familiar. I am currently based in Singapore. So yes, I am broadcasting from the equator, where I like to jokingly say that we only have 2 seasons here. We have the hot and wet season, followed by the wet and hot season. And yes, there's the thunderstorm going on outside right now because it typically happens about that time of day. Oh, and we have great internet here, by the way, for everyone who wants to feel jealous about that. It's fantastic. I was born and raised in Australia. You can probably tell that from what's left of my accent. It does sneak in. And I have spent quite a few decades in the corporate IT world, involved with networking and telephony communications, et cetera, for a number of years. I have had my own business a number of times on and off, and I have 2 running at the moment. But I've been teaching with IT Masters and CSU for, well, it turns out 14 years. I had to go back and count. And over 90,000 enrolled students in all of the short courses and university courses that I've done in that period. And that number is, of course, always increasing. I have created 14 of the major courses for IT Masters. 12 of them are still running, and 8 short courses, so this is my 9th. I do have a learning app, which is in redevelopment at the moment. And of course, I'm a gamer. And I like to say I have accumulated more than 20,000 hours of online gaming time, which by most measurements would call me some kind of expert. I call it research. My wife calls it something else, of course, and my 16-year-old son is trying very hard to catch up. So I'm father of 1, and my other hobby is writing science fiction. So that's me. Here's the subjects that I've written. So that gives you a bit of an idea of where I've been, what my headspace is coming from, and hopefully some of these are the sorts of things that have helped put together my picture of what Agile means to all of this. Been working with Agile ideas and concepts for, well, more than 20 years now, since these ideas first came out. So let's talk a bit about the Agile mindset, the headspace of Agile. A few things, let me put a couple of things up here. A couple of these things are going to make immediate sense. We kind of know that Agile is about changing things and changing things in a certain way. Even if we've only heard it talked about, we know that Agile means something's changing fast. And so there has to be an acceptance of change. And I make this point and I headline this because this is not something that every person is necessarily comfortable with. You have the people that are reactivists, that are people that like to react and respond to things, and they love a reactive environment, and they're comfortable where they can play fast and loose and jump on the next thing and respond. But we also have other people who have a background or a mindset that they're much more comfortable knowing the plan. They're much more happy when they know and can plan in advance, and they don't have to worry about it along the way. And we're all human beings. That whole range of mental paradigms all has to fit within an Agile mindset. So for some people, we have to accept that there is a degree of change because it's change that Agile wants to leverage, but it's not change for the sake of it. The way we bring good change and the way we allow ourselves to be accepting of change is by the fact that we can make better decisions. And I'm going to keep coming back to this, and you'll probably spot at a few points tonight this recurring theme that it comes back to Agile. And when we talk about it as a philosophy, it's a decision-making philosophy. And part of what I want to share with you tonight is how that really works. Putting aside the methodology itself, how does good decisions come out of Agile structurally, functionally? Because knowing that is what's going to help us replicate the benefits of that in all sorts of situations and in all sorts of other use cases. But Agile has this idea that value is what matters. And when you think about in comparison, like compared to a plan-based methodology where the plan is king and the specifications, and if you trust the plan will get you there. And so we protect the plan, we follow the plan, we look after the plan because the plan has been so carefully prepared and there's been so much investment in the analysis and all of the checking of everything. But when you have an Agile environment, you're looking for the value. It's not just about, well, let's not worry about the plan, or let's break up the plan, or let's play around with the plan. There has to still be a top-level priority. And in most Agile scenarios, it's the value. But the hard part is defining that value and then sharing an aligned understanding of value. And we're going to talk a bit more about that as we go through this evening. But you've probably already seen here, it is the customer's value that matters. And when we talk about the customer, it's important to keep in mind that we're not just talking about other businesses. We're not just talking about some other entity. We could be talking about internal, some other department, some other team. If we're doing something that's internally utilized, then whoever uses that is the customer of whatever is being done, whether it's being done with Agile or not. So there's always a value equation. There's always a value proposition. There's always a customer, and they're closely linked. But in order to make value a priority, we have to be able to focus on results. It has to be the results that matter. Now, this starts to get a little bit dangerous for some people. And this is where some interpretations of Agile start to say, oh, great, process, I could throw that out the window, right? We can go crazy, fast and loose, it's all freewheeling because output's what matters. Well, it's not that absolute. It is a shift in emphasis, and there's a very specific reason for it. And we're going to hit that a couple of times tonight. And when we understand the reasons why output is more important, we understand that process is not irrelevant. Output is more important because until we see an output, we can't react to it. And if reacting quickly to make the next good decision is part of what we need to be able to do, then we need output, and we need it now. We need it within a time frame, within a window, so we can then do something with that. And so if we get bogged down in following a process and we take a long time to deliver output, then we're going to take a long time to learn from that output. We're going to take a long time to be able to benefit from that learning. And that's not what Agile wants to do. Agile wants to be adaptive. It wants to be able to evolve, to grow, to reflect, to bounce off things. Agile is a mechanism that lets us say, okay, we want to learn from something that just happened. And then we want to make use of that knowledge. And that little secret, that little piece, is one of the most important elements, because that is what feeds into this being a decision philosophy. Because the only and best way to make the best decisions you can is with the most current, most up-to-date inputs that you can get. So if you don't have rapidly adaptive decision-making with the latest information, if that's not how you're making your decision, you're not agile, and you're not able to be adaptive and corrective. So Agile has to add this extra thing that says, well, we're in the pursuit of excellence. We're trying to do this better. And we have a degree of freedom that says, we can change the rules a little bit. We can go about things a little differently if we decide that's better. But it has to be because we've decided it's better. It can't be because, well, we feel like it, because it looks more interesting. It has to always be in the pursuit of increased value. So the flexibility comes from saying, well, we'll change what we need to change in order to do better. But doing better is irrefutable, either in what we deliver or in how we go about that. So these are pieces of the Agile mentality that need to be there as building blocks in all of the stakeholders and contributors. So here's 3 key takeaway points from Agile thinking like an Agile. The intent to leverage the most recent information. That is an absolute must-have. You have to be chasing, looking for, wanting, ready to get the most relevant, most current, up-to-date decision-making. Without that, you're not leveraging the best of Agile. Second, we therefore have to be willing to embrace and seek the revelations that come out of that. If something new can feed into our decisions, if we can get that little bit of knowledge, that little bit of expertise, that discovery, then we have to seek that. We have to want that. We have to be hungry for those details. And that's going to mean, okay, we're going to change something. That could mean, well, that was what we did was incorrect, unsuitable, or could be improved upon. So there has to be a willingness to accept, okay, I did that thing a week ago. I've hungrily sought out the feedback on it. It's not what it could or should be. And I'm now going to accept the fact that something different needs to happen. So that's a thinking mindset that needs to exist. But the last, and this is one of the tricky ones, and I call it tricky because this is the one that everyone loves to forget about, which is to say that there has to be a framework to shape all these interactions. There has to be a way for a group to do this. This is fine. Up until this point, you can say as an individual or even a bunch of individuals, yeah, we can do this. We can have this mindset. We can all be agile, right? Well, until we have a framework We're all agile independently, and therefore we're not leveraging each other. And that's the extra layer that agile needs to bring. So there has to be not only a framework, but a respect for the framework. And we're going to pull out in a moment a couple of those key elements and talk about what must be there for the framework in supporting the interaction and the collaboration, and why those pieces exist.
Tell me a quick question for you, Brenton.
Yes,
Does
Shane.
Agile ever get to the point where change is no longer required?
No, I think that would be, yeah, I hesitate to use the word anathema to it, but you can have moments where what was initially decided withstands the test of scrutiny and feedback, but they're usually merely moments. And one of the I'm going to use this first point here in this slide to elaborate on my answer to your question. And that is that one of the most important uses or benefits of Agile is for empirical problems, where we don't know what the entirety of the answer will be. We don't know what the entirety of the solution or how it's going to work will currently be. So we're always going to be learning along that journey. So you're never really going to have a situation where you're no longer changing. There may be frameworks pieces that you slow down your change. You stop changing how you go about it. And when we talk next week about Scrum, I'm going to talk about a typical Scrum set of frameworks. And an organization might say, well, yeah, we've got some flexibility, like how long is our sprint going to be? But once we've decided that, it may stay that way for years, and that may be great. And those things may get locked in because that's what that team works in. But then over time, the team will change, the goals will change, the projects they're working on will change. And there'll be a new need to say, you know what, our sprints should be longer now. And there's a reason for it. And we need to be ready to say, okay, that should change. Because to tackle the unknown, nothing is allowed to really be sacred, other than you need some building blocks. So when I said a moment ago, you need to have a framework for the interactions, that's an absolute. You need to have a framework for the interactions. But any of the frameworks on offer are merely suggestions that can be tailored and modified. So it helps us in that way with stuff that we don't know what the answer is going to be, and we have to go digging and exploring and figuring out. It also helps us because of the fact that we've built this framework. We've built this way of interacting that's effective, and it becomes fine-tuned over time. And so that assists collaboration. One of the most important things is the timetable of deliberate, proactive interactions. The collaborations don't only happen randomly on a whim, but they're encouraged to, they're welcome to, especially one-to-one and small interactions. But larger interactions happen on a deliberately predictable rhythm. And there's some pretty important reasons for that. Because being predictably able to collaborate in a certain way on a certain schedule helps everyone be ready mentally and factually ready for those discussions so that they can step into that meeting, contribute, absorb and benefit, and then move on. It helps us when we're trying to do something new. Again, that kind of leads back to the empirical, because we might have an idea of something. We might know what direction we want to go in. We might know something that we want to create. We might know a little bit about it, but we might not have it all figured out. And so Agile is a way to allow us to experiment whilst minimizing the risks of when we make mistakes. And Agile doesn't call them a mistake. Everything we do is simply an experiment. It's simply an exploration. It can't be a mistake if we didn't know what the correct answer, if we couldn't know what the correct answer would be until we did it. Can't be viewed as a mistake. It has to be viewed as an exploration. And there's a discovery after that that says, well, now we know that thing that we did, that's not what we need. And so that's valuable, but it's valuable if we plug that immediately back into the next decision cycle, and we have it sufficiently shared amongst all stakeholders that need that knowledge to be able to say, okay, now we know. We're going to absolutely leverage this piece of information that we just got. So you can see a trend with these points here of what Agile helps with. What kind of things does it allow us to do better and do more of. It's when we're not too sure and we don't really know and we don't have all the answers. And these are often just variations on a theme. So let's go through a few more deconstructed Agile concepts. It's about 3 slides of this. And then I'm going to go to the poll to give you, and then we'll pause at that point for some questions and some discussion at that stage. So let's go through. This is the heavy lifting part, where we're going to talk about some of the core concepts, and we'll break down some of the myths as well that some of you might have encountered or heard about. So one of the key things that probably most of you have heard about is that Agile, or all their methods, are iterative in nature. And the fundamental reasons for that are things that I've already mentioned and alluded to. They are iterative because you need a cycle that says we do and then we learn, and we do and then we learn. And it's a little more complicated than that. And I have a formula later on to elaborate on that. But the iteration is because there is progress and then there's a response to that progress and everything we've learned from it. So there has to be iterative in order to have a very tight educational loop that allows us to benefit from it step by step. It's adaptive, meaning that because, as we just looked at in the last slide, a lot of what we might be using Agile for is to do something that's not 100% figured out. And I really do mean just not 100% figured out. Even if there's only 10 or 15% variation, we might still decide that Agile is a great tool to use to help us explore those things. So one of the important things that happens is adapting what we're going to do next, or how we're going to go about it in the next cycle of activity, the next iteration, the next version of something. Another core concept is, we've already touched on this, but you have to have results. And Agile means that you've got to deliver something. And you have to deliver something that you can measure, that you can analyze. More specifically, that the customer, the beneficiary, can give feedback on. So if you give bits of something, like little pieces, and they don't yet all make sense, and it's very difficult for a customer or for other people to really understand how that works or how that's going to do something for them, more specifically, how to value that, then they're not going to be able to give us the kind of feedback that we need to then say, oh, I can make that better for you. Unless it's finished enough to have that level of evaluation and provide useful feedback, it's not finished enough to share. And if it's not finished enough to share, then it's not fast enough. And so this is one of the reasons why you might have heard the phrase user stories, and you might have heard about how Agile breaks this big project down into small parcels. Well, this is part of the reasoning for that. They have to be deliverable in a sufficiently complete way to be measured in terms of their value or their contribution to value. Thus, you get the feedback. Another absolutely essential. And so we've already talked about decision-making. It's a decision-making model. And the most important element or input into the decisions that we make on an iterative basis is the feedback from those who matter. And those who matter is, as we've said before, the customers, which is quite different to other methodologies where those that matter are the designers or the product owners, or those that matter are the executives, the people who might be funding it, you know, the policymakers, the risk takers. Here it's the customer, who could be some of those, and people wearing different hats and all of that. But the feedback that we really want is to determine its value, because value is what matters above everything else in terms of the deliverable at the end. So we're always thinking about how to deliver value. You're putting all these things together, right? I'll come to the empowerment in a second. Putting all these things together, and we've got these short periods of time where we're adapting to what we've just learned. We're delivering results that can be looked at and measured. We're getting the feedback to understand the value of what we've already delivered, so that we know then what we should be trying to do in our next iteration of activity, in whatever way that looks like. And another core concept that makes all this work harmoniously and functions together is the fact that individuals have a responsibility to bring their expertise. They have an ownership over the work they're doing. The pieces of work that each person gets is small enough that they can say, I can do that, or I can't do this, or I can do that, or I can do something else. And if I'm not sure, if I hit a wall, if I hit an obstacle, then they own the requirement to communicate, to share their knowledge, to get knowledge from someone else. There is a greater emphasis on people sharing and talking. And we're going to talk about that's a fundamental mechanism that we'll cover in a few minutes to go over that in a bit more detail. Let's break down some myths. Now, keep your questions coming, because two more slides, and we'll have a bit of a break for Q&A. Some Agile myths. Some of you might have heard of these before, right? Agile is free, full of freedoms. It's so free and easy to do, right? No rules apply. We can just be whatever. Now, you can probably tell from my tone of voice that that's probably a little bit fanciful. There are rules, and there are some very strict rules, and we're going to touch on some of them tonight. But Agile's just got different rules. Yes, it has freedoms in how we might go about certain things, freedoms in what we might choose to do today, freedoms in work and how that work is done, but not freedoms in how we make our decisions, not freedoms in how we communicate, not freedoms in the structure, because there has to be some elements that are uniformly applicable across a team or across a cohort or a workforce, so that everyone can operate within a sufficient alignment. Agile means we don't have a plan, right? It's just whatever. We can make it up, figure it out, do what we feel like. It's all about this or that. Well, no, Agile is full of plans. Agile has a lot of plans and a lot of planning. In fact, you could say in many situations, Agile people spend more time planning than the waterfall planners do. It's just that they're done by different people and they're done at different times. One of the phrases that I like to say is that a project, for example, is nothing more than 1 million decisions plus or minus 1 million decisions. Well, it doesn't matter what method you're using. If you're using Agile, you're still making most of the same decisions. You're just making them at a different time and in a different sequence. And the plan that you're working on right now today may have been a plan that was worked out yesterday, but there's still a plan. Flexibility, I've already touched on this point. Flexibility in how we go about delivering and doing our job. Flexibility in the opportunity to say, I've hit a wall with this. I need to talk to this person. I'm going to wait for them or talk to them tomorrow. I'll reach out. I'll make that happen. But right now I'm going to do this thing instead. We have those freedoms within Agile. But we don't have the freedom to say, yeah, I'm not going to take part in this meeting. I'm not going to provide my feedback. I'm not going to participate in the decision-making or the stand-up meeting or the review or those. We're not free to do that. We don't have the flexibility to decide how we collaborate, because everyone has to collaborate in a uniformly predictable way that lets everyone be ready to engage and participate efficiently. We can't do it differently every time, because people will be a little bit too adrift as to how does this meeting work this time? How do we go about this conversation this time? No, it has to be sufficiently predictable so that people can say, right, we do this, we do this, we do this, and I'm ready for each of those points. No documentation. Of course there is documentation. Now, the difference is that in a lot of Agile methodology, because we're not crafting this massive plan and we're not creating detailed specifications, there's not necessarily documentation as a precursor to output. Sometimes the output is what helps us write the documentation. How are we going to do this? I don't know. Well, you try it that way, I'll try it this way. And then at the end, when we figured it out, then we can document it. But when we go through the process, creating the suitable documentation that is needed for its ongoing health and care of whatever it is we're doing, that's just another task. That's just another thing we need to do. And we know with how technical debt works that if we're working on something complex and we don't record enough information to create documents in the near term, we come back to it a long time later, too much of what we are meant to be documenting has been lost or forgotten. Difficult to go back to. So we know through the pursuit of efficiency that we need to do documents or documentation in the right way at the right time. So it's not document free. And it's not whimsical. Yeah, we embrace change, but it's change that is determined to be in support of value or an experiment. that we believe is worth or worthy because it may support better value. It's not just because I'm going to do it this way because I think it looks better. Agile versus chaos. Chaos is what happens when we try to be as flexible as Agile, but without having the framework to get everyone on the same page and manage that flexibility. So if you've ever been, heard, seen something that says it's Agile and it looks and it seems chaotic, chances are it's because there's a lack of the framework in place to manage that flexibility uniformly. Last few points. Some of these lean on things that we're going to talk about in future weeks, so I'm going to cover these only quite briefly. There's less wastage. It is always an emphasis and an idea. And yeah, some of the original ideas in Agile began with this, such as lean. It's inclusive. We want the expertise of everyone involved. There is discussions and planning that includes all of the stakeholders, including all of the workers and the contributors. So it's inclusive because you never know where that little piece of clever knowledge is going to come from. It's about maintaining flow. It's about not being idle, not having resources idle, not having assets idle, moving forward, minimizing delays. And that means that we're constantly delivering something and putting it out there. Individuals own their own promises and the commitments that they make, but the team owns the result. And what that means is that when a bunch of people individually say, well, I'll do this and I'll do that and I'll do this, and a bunch of work gets worked on, but then someone is struggling, they're falling behind, they're not, it's not what they thought, new hurdles come up, some other team member who is ahead might step in and help them out. Or some piece of work might get legitimately put off and 2 or 3 people get together and solve a problem because the entire team stands by the results. And that mentality, that philosophy of jointly responsible for the results that get reviewed during the feedback cycle, that's what helps the team put together the right harmony and creates the reasons to collaborate. It's not every man for himself. It's about making sure that everyone gets across the line to whatever extent they can with whatever help they need. And that means people need the opportunity to self-organize. So you've got 2 different people working on different things. They need the flexibility to say, all right, I'm going to drop this thing because this person needs help. I'm going to help them. And I'm going to spend a day or 2 working on that. And that's going to get that over the line. And then I'm going to go over here and do my thing, but then I'm going to get this person. And all this happens within an iteration, and that needs to have the flexibility. You need to be able to do that because the team who are deeply involved in the complexities and the expertise of making this happen, they're the ones that know how best to do that. And we want to leverage that. We want to take advantage of it. Before we get to the next poll, or shall we have the next poll, Shane, and let people, shall we do the next poll? And
let's go for the next poll and I will
put that up. Yeah, and see if there's any questions.
Yes, there are plenty of questions. I'll start off with, so the poll is now out there and it is about what do you find the hardest for your team to adopt, as you've got there on the screen. But I thought I'd start with something slightly whimsical. Do you publish your sci-fi, and if so, where?
I don't yet, and I do intend, I do absolutely mean the word yet. I actually just had some meetings with a couple of people literally 2 weeks ago about trying to find a mechanism to publish. And one of the issues is that all of my writing is in script format. So everything I've done is in movie scripts, and I've written 9 movies so far, and it's a meta arc. And so my plan was always, you write, it's a 10 episode arc. You write the whole 10. So you can always go and backfill the plot devices that you need along the way. So it's the whole thing designed in one go, but it's almost ready to be either converted into novels or to be converted into episodic delivery, because as many of us know, it's not too far away that AI will be able to craft some of this animated, et cetera. So getting ready for that. Maybe that's where you might see it first. Who knows?
I might also point you at Malcolm Gladwell's latest podcast series on development hell about scripts held up forever in Hollywood. But let's move on from that.
Oh, look, it's a terrible process, and I'm loath to even consider it at the moment. Yeah, so yeah, look, maybe one day I absolutely intend to.
Yes, well, that was a real question from the audience.
Excellent, thank you.
Here's something more pertinent to the topic. Are there situations in software installations and upgrade where an agile approach is maybe not the right one to take?
So a couple of areas where it could be is if the team is simply not ready for it. So I've talked about mindset, and I've talked about mental attributes that we need to be ready for. And there are places and environments where the team isn't ready. And that's not to say they'll never be ready, but that's where hybrid scenarios have a role, where you might be saying, well, we're going to do the belt and braces thing. We're going to have a little bit of agility, but we're not just going to be on the ice going whatever. And so that's an indication that says maybe we need to do it with a little bit more constraint or a little bit different. But when you say contraindicated, where there's an actual suggestion where you just shouldn't do it, is different from saying where maybe you don't need it. And if you're doing something that is absolutely rock solid, straightforward, complex specifications, and it's absolutely got to do it this way, and there is no empirical discovery of anything, it's just got to work to these specifications, maybe you don't need it. Does that mean you couldn't use it? I don't necessarily think that's also true. So I've seen very few contraindications, but places where it's not as helpful as others.
Excellent. We've got stacks of questions, which is great. I will pick and choose a little bit, but they're sort of in order. Stephen's asked, how do the core Agile concept differ from the Deming's plan, design, study, and act cycle from the 50s? He was the father, wasn't he, of this sort of stuff?
Yeah. So the Deming cycle, plan, do, check, act, is timeless. And it's timeless because it's human nature. Right? It is a simple logic structure that humanity uses to do pretty much everything. I mean, you make lunch, you do the same thing, right? Plan, do, check out. What am I going to do? What ingredients do I need? I put the sandwich together, right? I do the thing. I bite the sandwich. I check it. Does it taste all right? Oh, no, this has gone off. I act upon it. So in everything we do in life, that's an extremely simple and always relevant formula. But it's insufficient when you say, okay, well, that's great for you, but what about when you've got a dozen people? And what about when you've got $1 million riding on it? Then that logic needs to be built upon and it needs to be expanded. And sometimes we do things really tricky by saying, well, it's the same 4-step sequence, but we're going to start our mantra in the middle, and then it's still the 4 steps after that. So, and I've got an example of that to show you a little bit later. But I think the Deming cycle is fundamental as the laws of physics to these ideas. So if you know it and you use it and you like it, keep it.
Great. I'm going to end the poll now, by the way. We've got 205 people have filled it in. But before we comment, let's just do a couple more questions. I think I know the answer to this one, but let's ask you, when you're working on an Agile project that involves many iterations, what point do you actually say, we're done?
Well, without being too practical and facetious about it, it's when the customer says it's done, and when the customer, which might be when the customer pays their bills. And because I say that because a lot of times the customer in an empirical project, an Agile project, they don't necessarily know the entirety of what they're looking for. They have some sort of vision in their head and they're aiming for something. And they just keep working on it and keep refining on it and say, oh yeah, that's really good. Oh, we didn't know you could do that. That's really great. Can you do more of that? And this is a lot of how these projects go, which means it stops often when the client says, okay, I'd love you to do more, but I'm out of money or out of time. Or we need to do other things. It's good enough. Or we've diminished the disappointment down to a point where we're no longer willing to invest. And that often has an emotional element to it because, like I just said, the words I used, disappointment and investment. So that's usually where it starts and where it comes from. It's about understanding the value being delivered, and when value is sufficient to no longer need any further investment, no longer warrant it. But sometimes they go forever, and that's topic 3. We're going to talk about in 2 weeks' time. That's value streams, and they go forever.
It's almost like Kanban, I suppose, isn't it? There's been some questions about Kanban too. I'll just ask this one just because I think it fits in with what you've been talking about. This is from Ronnie. It seems odd that we don't know what to expect until we get it in that iteration or exploratory process. As a former scientist, it seems counterintuitive twice today. We would normally have setting a goal in advance and worked towards it and have known roughly what to expect, even if we're often surprised by what the outcome might be.
So I think there's room for that logic. There's room for that idea, because it does depend on a couple of factors. For example, it will depend on the level of expertise and experience available within the team. And that's always variable. So you're going to have a team that's done stuff, but unless they've built the exact same thing previously, then there's going to be something that's a little new for at least some members of the team. And it's unrealistic to say, well, I'm going to only ever have team members that know precisely what to do because they've done that exact thing before. So a lot of the time what we're doing is we're using Agile to make up for the fact that a bunch of things that are going to happen, they're quite easy to do, but the people have to yet figure that out. And we need to build in a little bit of that. And that's not by saying, oh, well, that team's poor. No, every team and every person doing this has something to learn in most cases. And you kind of want that, because if you let people just repeat the same stuff, work becomes boring, life becomes boring, and you don't get the best motivated effort out of people. So everyone needs to be growing and learning. So there's an element of that that says, well, the Agile is a solution for that. That's a endemic problem as well. But you also still have an idea of where you're going to go. And we're going to touch on that in a minute, because that's the idea of the vision. That's the idea of shaping. All right, here's my story about what I'm aiming for, or maybe it's more than a story. And maybe they really have a pretty good idea and they can tell you a lot, and that might simplify the process. That doesn't mean you won't use or benefit from an Agile methodology, but it might mean that you have quite a good idea. It's not always guessing and clueless, but Agile doesn't really care how much information you do or don't have. So it's not going to punish you if you don't have enough, nor is it going to punish you if you get halfway through and change your mind. You might have a very clear idea, and I've been there. I've for my own app, I've said I want it looking like this, and then 6 months later, I've thought, you know what, it would be really good if it was like this, and you throw out a couple of months worth of work because you've just made that discovery as a designer. And yeah, there's an element of creativity in some of this as well, because you're not just copying someone else's thing. Often what you're doing is doing it for the first time ever, or somebody is.
Great. Let's have a look at the poll results, because I'm conscious of time. And
okay.
There you go.
There you go. A reasonably decent spread of things here. Look at that. That's quite broad.
There was some grumbling about only being able to choose one option in the chat as well, but I think that's the purpose of what you've got in the end.
Yeah, and look, I think I'm not sure that if people could choose multiples, they'd feel better about the quality of expressing their answer. But would it necessarily change the graph? I'm not so sure it would. There might be a few things there that spike a little bit further. But I think the takeaway that we can all see here is that, you know, it's all quite complicated and it's all quite challenging and difficult to adopt something somewhere. And, you know, we have our own perspective on this question and these answers, but we're probably surrounded by people who would be colleagues in an Agile environment, and they're all perhaps going to have different answers to this question. And so when you look at any team, you really got to assume that it's all difficult until it's working.
Yes, there's some questions about teams that we'll hit later on. So
we will. Let's have a quick mention of some of the other Agile ideas, just to put in a box around them, not to go into details with them, because we have short courses elsewhere that cover some of these in more detail, right? So lean is something that originally credited to coming out of Toyota in the 1980s, the Toyota way. That was their way. It was a manufacturing idea originally, and it was about minimizing wastage, not having idle resources. And in terms of resources, not even having idle materials. You don't have things accumulating at some workstation. You only have it arrive moments before you need it. And also a few other things like learning from the people working on things. But lean is really focused on making sure there's no wastage, which is where the name came from. Scrum, we're going to go through in some detail next week. And that's where you've heard things about sprints and iterative planning, reviews, daily stand-ups. They all come out of the Scrum methodology. which we're going to explore in detail. Kanban, as you mentioned, Shane, there's probably a bit of a discussion about it. It's all about flow, and there is an earlier short course a few years ago that does touch on some of that, but it's often used not so much in manufacturing, although it can be, but it's something that's more often used in service delivery, about making sure there's no bottlenecks, making sure there's no gaps or stops in anything. DevOps, we have a 4-week short course last year on DevOps that is about continuous integration, continuous delivery, the merging of how we develop software and deliver it in a cyclic, coordinated manner. These all are variations, and they all utilize and leverage all of the mindset things that we just talked about. They're universal to all of this. But I want to now talk a bit about the role of information, because here I want to, some of you who are familiar with Agile are thinking, okay, well, that's all interesting, Brenton, but I haven't really got anything new yet. Well, here we're going to start to stretch beyond what we already know about Agile, because I'm going to talk about some of the reasons why Agile is going to change us a little more. And it's all to do with our changing relationship with information and its accessibility. And yes, this does lead to a bit of a tap in to AI, but we'll get to that. First, I want to talk about a couple of key concepts that got to make sense to you. Just in case versus just in time. This is about learning. Right? This is about learning on the job. This is about learning how to do something. If you think about how much do we go and study in advance in a packaged course that we learn just in case, compared to what we learn just in time because we need it, right? And so think about how that's changed in the last 10, 15 or so years. The ability for us to say, okay, how do I do this thing with my software? Previously, we'd probably go and do a course, or we'd read a book or something. But now, what do? We get onto a web search and we type in, how do you do this thing? Right? We used to, in some cases, press F1 and get something useful out of that. And sometimes we still do. But we can pull in a wide range of resources on how to do something. Just that little bit of knowledge when we need it. Right? So that's just one little piece of that. I'm going to build a picture of what all this is going to do to us. This means that we can get the specifics, the content, the details far more easily than we ever could. And we can get the precise, specific piece of information that we need to solve our question or to solve our problem whenever we need it. We know that. We know that carrying a smartphone with us has made it easy for us to know what's the weather, or how to get there, or is there traffic, and all that sort of thing. Now, what this is doing within the business world is it's starting to have an impact on the importance of expert knowledge in terms of facts. Right? We're all used to the idea that experts know stuff. And yeah, they know how to do all sorts of things, and they've got experience from that, but they also know details, they'll know facts. That aspect of expertise is being diminished. It's losing its importance, because we know that people with less experience and who have delved less deeply into an area of expertise can get that piece of knowledge. They might not necessarily know as much of what to do with it, but that's where that expertise is increasing. So there's a growing importance on the ability to use the facts that we can now pull from everywhere. That's gaining importance. Now, we can philosophically ponder, what does that do in the long term to the whole idea of what is expertise? That is changing. And I don't have a crystal ball that tells me exactly where that's going to go. But we can look at these contributing factors and say, there's forces at work here that's changing our relationship with information and what is expertise. It's impacting all of that. So what stays important, or what's becoming more important? And that, as an example, is the role of context. Now, so if you've got info that you can pull in vast volumes at any point, what do you need as an intelligent person to be able to expertly make use of that? You need a contextual understanding. You need to see a picture. You need to be able to see a situation, a scenario. You need to have the context of what is relevant to what. So you can say, well, this fact that I've just found, it's relevant over here. And it's the answer to this question. And it's going to help us do this. And this piece of knowledge is going to be relevant over here. And we use context to be able to do that. And yes, that is absolutely a piece of expertise that we've been familiar with for decades. And that's growing. And people who aren't necessarily lifelong experts at something, but they're gaining a greater grasp of context, and they're able to start using the immense supply of details, they're gaining a competence that isn't necessarily attributable to a long period of accumulated expertise. Now, how do you then share that amongst a bunch of people? So we're talking on an individual basis at the moment, but what about when context is shared or needs to be shared amongst a group? How is that working? Are we using that more often? If we're looking at all these forces and saying, okay, that's what our relationships with information is pressing on the workforce, then in terms of leadership, in terms of structure, in terms of orchestration, we need to have a stronger aligned context as a key determinant of success. And this is the shift, the paradigm shift from plan-based, where the workers need to have no idea what it is they're building, what they're doing. All they need to know is, I've been given this task and I have the expertise to do that task. And I don't need to know everything else of what it connects to. That's what it used to be. But in the current environment, it's a lot more valuable to empower individuals with the greater awareness. So this is the forces at work. This leads to a growing need and an expansion of context and vision. And this is another one of the fundamental attributes of agile thinking. You have to have a unified, aligned context. It supports the idea of distributed decision-making. You can have different people in the team that have their clever interactions and have their opportunity to say, you know what, we're going to do this, and we're going to do it this way, I'm going to try this, because they have an idea of what the big picture is. They have a contextual awareness of the role that their little piece will have in a bigger thing. And they have the mental capacity to absorb and understand these extra big picture components, because they're not expected to carry around with them this exhaustive library of details. They're allowed to forget those because they can pull them into their brain at any moment. What they're expected to have more of is what to do with that when you pull it in. So people know how to contribute more broadly. They're able to leverage the more recent information, but they can only do that if they have a greater contextual awareness. So that's a food for thought that's going to lead us into some of the things we're about to talk about in other areas of where Agile is reaching. Here's the decision cycle. I promised you a mantra. There was a slight variation on the Deming cycle. So here it is. This is a decision cycle, right? And the reason I've plucked this mantra out at a different point in the equation is because it is a decision cycle. And that is, the first thing we do is we learn, we decide, we act, and then we review. So yes, the word's chosen carefully to think in terms of Agile. To learn is to gather the latest inputs, get the feedback, right? We talked about it at the front, hungry for the knowledge, bring in the expertise, the advice, everything we can learn, because we want to make the best decision we can today. We waited until today to make this decision precisely because it lets us do this first learn piece. So then we decide. We make a collaborative, collective, or individual decisions. We make a plan, and that plan might only be just for today. Here's my plan for the next few hours. It's still a plan. And we do that. But we deliver something that will allow us to check against the plan to say, well, did we do that? Did it work? Did it meet expectations? Did it happen as expected? And then we review it to say, well, could we do better? What's the value of this? Is the customer happy? What is everything else that we can gain out of this right now that's going to feed back into the very beginning of that? Because any minute now, we're going to make another bunch of decisions. So we're going to have things to learn. When you make this cycle tight, when you make it seamless and you make it collaborative and you make it aligned, that's the framework, right? You got a bunch of people doing this. And that's why there exists such things as the daily stand-up that everyone has to attend. because everyone does their decision-making, their sharing, and their collaboration start point there. So you get productivity momentum because of the speed, the accuracy, and the reliability of this cycle, and because people trust it. And they can only trust something that they can predict, and that they know their piece of it, and then they know how to work with it. And that's why a cycle, you can change the labels to whatever you want, but a cycle is a necessary, essential function of any agile system. Now let's let that lead us into some thoughts about where we're going to go. No, this isn't a poll. This is just an open question to segue into a few ideas I'm going to toss out there at you to see if any of this is going to resonate. Here's a few, right? Auditing. Maybe auditing, not a popular thing to do. Maybe not. We don't have lots of auditors in most organizations, but just anything where we're checking records, there is iterative discovery and investigation. There's a collaboration of findings amongst people and stakeholders, and we adapt an investigation process when we're auditing something. Guess what happens when we look at troubleshooting? It's the exact same things we do. Technical troubleshooting, problem finding. We want to troubleshoot that technical issue, that problem, that root cause. What are we doing? Well, typically we're going to have an iterative approach. And especially if we're collaborating with others, we're going to have a rhythm with that approach that allows people to collaborate effectively. We're going to adapt the investigation process as we learn stuff. We want every piece of knowledge to feed back into the decision of, oh, where do I look next? What do I try next? What do I do next? We already do and use agile pieces of logic when we do troubleshooting. What about sales and marketing? You could argue today that that's absolutely agile in nature, even though we don't call it that. We don't put an agile framework around it. But what if we did?
There are teams.
Isn't it? Go ahead, Shane.
There are teams even within our wider organization that use sprints.
Right, outside of technical delivery.
In marketing.
Yeah, it fits marketing like a glove. It's fantastic because it's iterative. You put an ad out, you get a response. You share that with others. Everyone needs to learn from the good and bad of an ad placement. Why not? Why would you miss that? Right? Otherwise, you're wasting time and effort. If an ad goes out and not everyone gets to learn what works and doesn't work, you're wasting a ton of money. Right? And the value to the audience is subjective. We don't know reliably who's going to buy what, who's going to click on what ad until it goes out there. It's always empirical to at least some extent. Could work perfectly. Service delivery. I'm not going to delve into this too deeply because that's topic 3 in a couple of weeks. We're going to go through how this might work in a bit more detail when we get there. Right? But you can see that service delivery is something that is an evolving process. It's a little bit harder, which is why we're going to spend a bit more time talking about it. What about one of the biggest, one of the toughest? Strategic planning. Now, this is a real tough nut. You think, hang on, strategic planning, that's stuff that we do once a year. Really? You're going to tell me that we should be agiling that? Well, we do already. Because any governance framework is inherently built to bring agility into a strategy. One of the core functions of governance is to create a feedback loop between the strategy decided up here by executive leadership and the functional activity that goes on in the workplace, and creates a feedback loop that says, are people actually following that strategy? And if they are, is it working? And if it's not, what do we need to change at the strategy? Now, yeah, okay, it's a longer cycle. Your sprints might be 3 months. But it's the same mentality. It's the same ideas. And when we see a strategy that gets deployed and it doesn't work, a lot of the time it's because there wasn't an aligned context. The vision wasn't clear because people make their daily decisions. They interpret the strategy on a daily basis and it gets morphed and warped and altered. What do we do about that? Well, most executives do nothing, because they don't have a mechanism, they don't have any sort of system in place that says, you know what, it's an iteration, you need a feedback loop, you've got to make some new decisions, do something about it, or you'll miss out on the opportunities. So potentially you could reimagine almost any department, almost any kind of activity, and you could query whether or not some pieces of this mindset could apply, should apply, or would be helpful. And then when you bring that back alongside what I mentioned before about how our relationship with information is changing changing our relationship with context, changing our relationship with expertise. It's pushing us into using a more and more agile approach to pretty much everything. Here's our final poll whilst we grab a few last questions. This is the end of our discussion and presentation tonight, folks. So those of you who have a few more questions, please put them up and we'll tackle as many of them as we can before we run out of time.
Here I was not clicking the mute button. Okay, we've got a pile of questions. There's in excess of 20, so we may not get through them all, but please feel free to put some others in there. And as I think Brenton said earlier, if we don't get through them all, feel free to ask them again in the forums on the online learning platform at learn.itmasters.edu.au. So let's have a look and see what the best thing is here.
Shane, I just want to let people know on this poll, if people have questions about something else or some idea, I would encourage them to put it in the forums because people will have suggestions, people will have ideas, and it might be a great opportunity for some of the attendees or people who have ideas about something else, put it in there. Let other people contribute.
There is a raging debate going on just while we're talking in the chat about the value of stand-ups. There's a couple of people, I think, who were very much thinking they're wasting time, and a bit of a pile on with other people saying, no, they're essential. And maybe that's a good discussion to go into the forum where you might get more time to talk about it. But let's go through some of the more general questions.
Okay.
Here's a fun one, which I've seen in my life a few times. Interested to know the best ways and principle of dealing with change requests as a customer with software developments in Agile projects. Sometimes it feels like you are financially penalized for raising CRs. Is there a better way or a best way?
So I'm going to take an assumption that a customer who faces challenges with change requests is not really necessarily dealing with an organization that is embracing all of the paradigm of Agile. Because part of the Agile paradigm is that we're not just willing to change, we're hungry for change if that's what's going to lead to greater value, and it's the customer that determines the value. So there's an argument within Agile that says change requests should be as easy as ordering a cup of coffee because that's how often you should have one. But then there's some realities that are always dependent upon what is the actual project, what's the thing that you're working on, and what are you doing? And sometimes there needs to be a greater degree of record keeping and accountability, and there needs to be an easier audit trail of exactly what was changed, and especially if it's a larger project. So we have to pay a little bit of respect to both sides of that and say, well, yes, there needs to be a facilitation of change, and it's not ever something that a customer should feel is punitive. And if it is, then it doesn't matter how good the reasons are for the change request process, a customer who feels punitive about it needs to have that sorted out with the provider, because no provider would ever want a customer to feel punished through that process. That is absolutely not what you normally have with an Agile mindset. And look, that organization, that provider may have absolutely good reasons for doing it. We're not able to judge that from a distance. But it's not purely what it's meant to be.
I think to some extent it's a bit of a bleed from the construction industry where people underquote and try and get their money back through change requests.
Most of the reasoning for these things is financial in nature, but it could also be because they have a particular mindset amongst their team and they're trying to deal with that and they're struggling to deal with that. You know, they could be in an interim process of bringing in Agile and they're only partway there, and it's, you know, that they're at risk if they don't put some straps around it. So, yeah, but these things can be understood if they're often shared and talked about, but you never want your customer to feel bad about it, because that's like telling the customer you feel bad about asking for sugar in your coffee if that's what you want, right? A barista would never, in a situation, be asking a customer to feel a little bit awkward about asking for exactly how they like their coffee.
Exactly. I will close the thing poll in just after the next question, but this one's interesting. This is for some advice about how to deal with a situation where you've got experienced people in the team as well as juniors. And what they're finding out is that the experienced people bring bad habits, i.e. adding work to sprints, not planning work, working on new urgencies, etc. While the more junior ones are actually being coached really well, as they should be. And it becomes a problem because the experienced people are stepping in to help the juniors, which isn't great. How would you help combat something like that?
So it sounds like a methodology issue where you've got methodology being embraced in different ways in different areas. And I think whilst the stereotypes are probably quite common, there can be a number of reasons why some people find it easier to adopt to a new pattern and others don't. And yes, it's often related to their experience, but it could be other reasons too. And I think it doesn't really necessarily matter what the reasons are, but I think you need to have a strong methodology champion. You need to have an individual or individuals who are absolutely and ultimately accountable for having the methodology work a certain way, embraced and adopted a certain way. And it doesn't matter what the reason is, when individuals within the team aren't working within the methodology, that has to be addressed. They have to, get some help, get some information, have a quiet word, whatever it might need to be. And I say that because one of the points that I sort of repeated a couple of times through our webinar tonight is that Agile only succeeds when the framework is absolutely rock solid, fundamental, and everyone can engage with it in the right way. So you can't afford to have that wobbly, and have the nuts and bolts loose. You need someone to come around and hammer down those nails and tighten up those nuts and bolts. And that's why when we talk next week about Scrum, we will talk about a Scrum Master. Fundamentally, their role is to make sure that everyone scrums the right way for our organization and fix those little things. So the answer is have a methodology champion or two or three, or at least one from each team member, and empower them. Great.
How do Agile, I will close the poll and we'll talk about that towards the end. We also will close questions now as well. It's 8:45 and I'm sure people are starting to get a bit fidgety. How do Agile practitioners convince or educate management that Agile is not just ad hoc and by whim? Context, priorities are easily changed, people moved around too often, and request prioritization depends on who's squeaking the loudest or who is who in the hierarchy. And plans are often just idealized versions of what people want rather than practical.
There's a lot of things that feed into that. Like a tongue-in-cheek first step, make them sign up for this webinar. That would be part of the solution. But no, in all seriousness, in my experience, that normally happens when strategy is weak. In an organization where strategy isn't clear, it's not necessarily fully informed, people aren't following a strategy. When you have a really strong strategy that's fully empowered from the top down, you find that competing politics and competing agendas are a little less likely. Or at the very least, you find that they quickly find their way up to the higher echelons where, there's always someone at a higher level who's responsible for the bigger picture and its success. But if they're not sufficiently proactively invested in, hang on, you over there and you over there, sort this out, or this is our priority, live with it. If that's not happening and you are stuck in a political environment, then the only protective source you have is the law of consequence. And Agile is great about flexibility. You do this or you can do that, or you can change your mind, but there's always a price. And I said before, we don't call it wastage. We don't call it a mistake if you've explored something. But if an organization doesn't know what value is, then they need to be able to accept, or if a leader doesn't know what their value is they're looking for and they're changing things and priorities change, there's always a cost, which is the sunk cost. And that needs to hang around the neck of whoever is empowered or responsible for the change in priorities. And often they'll make that decision because no one's told them what the price of that decision is. And so if you have a mechanism that says, yep, sure, you want to do this, no problems, boss, happy to do that for you. By the way, here's my report on the sunk cost impact of that. I'd like you to sign off on that. So we're cool. And, in your own way. But that's the only solution that I found that works.
Often people don't have clarity around those things. So here's an omnibus question for you. We've had a number of questions about comparing Agile to other PM methodologies. For example, waterfall, is there some sort of sweet spot of a hybrid? Why not Kanban from somebody else? And how do Agile and Prince2 work together? It seems like, it could be possibly answered by saying, well, what's the thing about Agile that makes it the right thing over those other methodologies?
So it's a bit of a cop-out in my answer, but Agile isn't a methodology. Agile is only a mindset. And if you want to be Agile, you want to be the things that we talked about at the very beginning. And how you choose to go about that is always going to have a little bit of a hybrid answer to it. And Prince2 absolutely allows us to incorporate Agile projects within it. It has enough in it to do that. Others do as well. Kanban is just another structure. What I said was you have to have a structure. And it could be Scrum, it could be Kanban, it could be something else. And you can have whatever works for you. I don't think there is a simple answer that says this is the good way, this is not a good way. I think all of these are just examples of how the fundamental framework needs to happen. And if you know what the forces are, which is what we talked about at the beginning, if you can appreciate those forces and how they need to be solved, then you're welcome to create your own version of whatever it is that's out there, because everything that's out there is just an example. So it's a cop-out answer because there is no simple answer to the question. It really does depend on what's going to work for an organization. And we are going to talk in week 4 a lot about exactly that. So we're going to go into the hybrid. How does Waterfall work with Agile? How does Prince2 work with it? How do we stick it together? And there will be some practical elements in that as well.
Excellent. What attributes distinguish Agile as a more suitable and unique for adaptive project management compared to other methodologies? However, this is pretty much the same thing. However, does it matter whether it's in international development agencies? And I think the person asking this question is from somewhere in Africa, as opposed to it being used in the private sector.
One of the things that comes up against Agile is that the bigger the organization and the more accountability they have to a larger audience, the harder it is for them to have the flexibility that Agile brings about. So you're talking about government organizations, you're talking about international NGOs, etc. Their shareholders are enormous. There's often legal implications for them. The shareholders is every citizen of the nation. And so they're often beholden to a whole set of strict criteria that makes it difficult for them to embrace all of the Agile mindsets. They're very much more likely to find a hybrid model where some of the things work and some of them don't. They're still going to have the same problems that say, okay, this is empirical. Waterfall just won't work reliably. We're going to get a white elephant if we do that. But we can't just go entirely Agile because, there's defense or security or there's charitable funds that we're accountable for, et cetera. There has to be a middle ground. I don't think there's a simple answer, but I absolutely believe that when you get up to the government and international level, organizational level, there's an additional set of constraints that then have to apply at the strategic layer.
Okay, and I think probably this will be the last question because we do want to look at the poll. You've mentioned trust as an important element of Agile. However, the flip side of trust could be risk. So how is risk part of the Agile framework, and is it expressly, attended to?
It is absolutely a thing, but it's dealt with very differently. If you think about risk in a plan-based methodology, your solution to risk is things like contingencies. And contingencies have an overhead in terms of planning overhead, in terms of what you invest in. And you don't have those risks in the same way with Agile, but you have exploration risks. You might invest a bit of time and effort in figuring something out that's more than you really allowed for, and you could face that. So inherently, what Agile is trying to do with its very tight turnarounds in terms of make a new decision, and its very extreme hunger for every bit of feedback you can get to feed into that next decision so that every decision is the best you could make. That's its risk prevention. And in some ways you forgive, and you have to forgive yourself for saying, all right, well, last week we made these decisions. Today we realized they were imperfect. but they were the best we could have made at that time. And if we can say that, if we can confidently say that, then we can't beat ourselves up for a risk that manifests. You can have problems where something was completely overlooked because people rush forward. You have things which we'll talk about next week in Scrum, like a sprint zero, which is where you're not expected to deliver anything for the customer. It's entirely devoted to figuring stuff out. Should we do it this way or should we do it that way? And you can have those, and if you miss that, if you don't do that, you say, oh, let's just deliver stuff, and you rush forward and you skip those things that are meant to help you manage risk, you can get caught out and end up with a bit of disappointment along the way. But its main risk mitigator is the fact that we know about the risk immediately because we're gathering every bit of information and feedback. So we know about it as soon as we could have, and we've acted on it as soon as we could have. What more can we expect? So that's a typical solution. But some unique risks, they do have a particular issue. And yeah, you have some things have lead times, and some things are huge dependencies. I made a choice at one point where I had to make a choice. Do I deploy something on AWS or do I deploy it on Microsoft Azure? Now, for anyone who knows what that means and knows what that is, if you change your mind, it's huge, right? You got to pick one and you got to go with it. And so you really need to do a bit of research and make the best decision you can out of that. But there's always a bit of risk.
Is all feedback good feedback in that context?
I think as a rule, yes. All constructive feedback, all feedback that informs.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. What do you reckon? Shall we go on to the poll?
Let's have the poll. We have another poll. It's kind of a nice little spread. We've got a few people that have said something else, and I've already encouraged them to talk about it in the forums if they wish to. But which is hard? Troubleshooting and problem solving, and service delivery is up there. That's really interesting because we're going to go into that in a bit more detail in topic 3. So those of you who are interested in that, we'll cover some more of how that might work in week 3. Sales and marketing, I think I'm not surprised that that's one of the easier ones because, as you yourself mentioned, Shane, you've seen it at work. But look, there's a very interesting spread that everyone sees their challenges differently. Everyone has their own perspective on how these things currently work, how they should work, how they might work. And this is part of the problem with Agile. People aren't going to agree. And we need to get them to still work collaboratively and constructively together to achieve big things. And sometimes the only thing that they can agree upon is that we're going to meet about it every week. And we're going to explore everything every week. And that might be the only thing that we agree on in the beginning. And sometimes that's enough to start.
There are actually a couple of questions around the fact of, being on Agile projects where you're the only technical person and everybody else is a manager who has no idea about Agile. How do you make that work? And is it really an Agile project in that sense?
Probably not. Right. And unless it comes back to the methodology champion, right? And it's a huge challenge because if the technical person is the only person capable of being the methodology champion, and they can't even get everyone else to even agree that they need such a thing. Oh, yeah, we don't need a methodology champion. We know how to do this. Right. And someone's saying, well, actually, no, you don't. That's a really hard conversation to have. And sometimes the only thing we can do is put a note on the record and say, right, here's my views. Can I share my views? Is that allowed? Right. Here's what I think is missing from this. We are lacking a coordinated methodology. What's the absolutely most important thing in any Agile project? My answer, as Brenton Burchmore, it's the framework we're using and the fact that everyone knows it. That's the number one biggest thing. And if you don't have that, you're not Agile. You can't possibly claim to be Agile. And if you can convince those managers of that truth, that you need an absolute clarity in the framework that you're working with and how you're going about it, before you can even use that A word, then maybe you've got some hope.
Great. Well, on that note, I think it's time to say good evening. I apologize to the 15 or more questions that we have not answered. As I said, please feel free to stick them onto the forums and participate in the forums. There's been some great conversation going on in the chat tonight. There's obviously people there with a great depth of knowledge and practice in Agile and project management in general. So I'd like to say a big thank you to everybody for contributing tonight and coming along. It's been a really good evening. Thanks also especially to Lil for her work in the mediation area. And having said all of that, I think it's probably time to say goodnight and leave it to you, Brenton, to finish off.
Thank you, Shane, for all of your great MC work tonight and for keeping everyone informed and happy. Thank you to everyone who put up some questions. Apologize for those that didn't get them answered. I will be having a look through the forums and seeing where I can contribute. But as Shane said, we have a lot of other knowledgeable, capable people with some great opinions that'll hopefully be shared along the way. We have lots more to discuss next week. We will be talking about Agile projects in detail. Please come along for that. Until then, that's all from me for now. Good night.
Thank you. Good night.